Welcome. Greetings. I am Adam W. Rodriguez. Welcome to my channel. I am the host here at The Art of AWR. I have just finished reading the book, The Black Company by Glen Cook. I'm going to be doing a review about it. I'm going to talk about the history of the book a little bit, kind of the style of the writing. I'm going to do a little bit of pro and con, and then I'm going to rate the book and make whatever recommendation I might make. Awesome. But before I begin, I would like to invite you to subscribe to my channel. I am a performer and a writer and artist of many years. And so if you like the idea of a guy who has 30 plus years experience in arts and entertainment, doing book reviews, talking about recommendations and observations of literature and other types of art, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Maybe like this video and hit that bell so that you get notifications every time a new episode drops. Awesome. Let's talk about the book. First, I just want to talk about the fact that I have been kind of on a quest. I want to learn more and read more fantasy grimdark. I just finished reading The Lies of Locke Lamora last month, which is usually on a lot of lists of grimdark fantasy books. I enjoyed it. I kind of got an idea of that grimdark feel. You know, you want the world to be kind of bleak. You want your characters to be a little amoral. You want there to be some ultraviolence and the like throughout the book, right? So when I went and looked back at some of those lists of grimdark fantasy, Glen Cook is often referenced as sort of a front runner, like a forefather, if you will, of grimdark fantasy, you know, citing specifically The Black Company. So I thought I'd kind of get to the roots and read some of these older books. It came out in '84, and at that time I was reading a lot of pulp fantasy. This one must have kind of flew under my radar. You know, I was judging a lot of books by their cover back in those days. Lots of Jeff Easley, Larry Elmore, Clyde Caldwell, Frank Frazetta. Those guys, usually I would see their book covers and I would buy their books. So sometimes other books, good books, kind of flew under our radar. None of my friends even really read this one that I know of. Not to say this isn't a cool cover. This is a really rad cover. I like the cartooniness and the mask and the cult symbols at the bottom. It's pretty great, right? It would have totally fit right in with that whole satanic panic that was going on in the 80s. I read that Glen Cook was serving in the U.S. Navy, and it was during the late 60s, early 70s, which is Vietnam era. I didn't delve too much into his service, but he obviously got a good idea of what military culture is like. And he totally brings it in this book. He uses all that knowledge very effectively in this book. I had never heard of military fiction until maybe 5 or 6 years ago when I read like my first military fiction book. So this also falls under that category. And I understand that when this book first came out, it was decently received, but the large part of the readership were soldiers. Soldiers loved this book. And after reading it, I can totally tell why, because it totally embraces the military culture, that kind of Band of Brothers style book. You know, men in combat, sharing space, and kind of making room for each other. It's pretty cool. It's pretty rad. Let's talk about the writing style. Glen Cook writes this book from the point of view of the character of the company's historian, the annualist, of the keeper of the annuals of the history. I don't want to use the word annualist. It's really it's a word that's easy to misinterpret. So I'm just going to call him a historian. The character's called Croker. He's also the company's physician, kind of a field medic. And, you know, I didn't get the name until like in the middle of the book. It's like, oh, Croker. Sharp. Awesome. Well done. The names are very cool. They're very clever. He uses the character names very effectively in that sometimes he'll give a character a name and it totally front loads what the character is like. You know what I mean? Like, he has a character named Silent, and he doesn't talk at all. You know, he has a character called Goblin who has like this kind of dumpy, round, guy. There's a guy named One Eye who has one eye. But like there's one guy named Raven, and he's very intense and broody. You know what I mean? Like you kind of get a little bit of an idea of who these guys are just by the names they're given. There's a guy named Mercy, who he describes as a guy who might pull the wings off of flies. So like he gives him a very brief description as a man who is a sadist, and he's called Mercy, so he must be the opposite. Like calling a fat guy slim or a tall guy shorty. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So his character naming conventions were very clever and very well used. One of the things that I remember reading or thinking about when I was reading this is the whole grimdark thing being super dark. Like, how dark is grimdark? And I come to understand that it's just levels, as long as it's hitting those marks, checking off those boxes. This was one of those like jazz musician books, the whole notes he's not playing kind of thing. In that, and the character Croker even brings it up, he sort of sugarcoats the exploits of this mercenary guild, this brutal, awful mercenary guild who, go into villages and rape and loot and burn and destroy things. But he sugarcoats their exploits a bit in the histories because he doesn't want to really tarnish the image of the Black Company, right? And so that's what I mean about like the notes he's not playing, the words he's not saying. He acknowledges that he's sugarcoating, and then you read it, and it's just like, yeah, this does feel like sugarcoated violence. Like there's definitely violence going on, and he does touch on it, but not in such a way that it's so graphic and so hardcore that you come to loathe the members of the Black Company, although they are quite loath-worthy, if you will. So it was a clever way of doing their grimdark. It didn't feel like an R-rating movie. It felt like an NC-17 kind of movie. So, well done, Glen Cook. I think because he did it the way he did, he could have a much younger audience. So, I think Glen Cook's a clever writer. The first 100 pages were pretty rough. You kind of get thrown in the middle of things, and you're just like, what the hell? I guess we're moving into the cons section right now of my review. So the first 100 pages were a little rough. But once you kind of got your footing, actually once you finish that first chapter, after that, it starts to kind of even out, and you're like, oh, I know what's going on now. Like, you don't know the historian talking to you at the top. I think going into it with that might be helpful in general for if you're reading this for the first time. So I would wonder what it would be like on my second read, if just knowing at the top we're dealing with Croker and Croker's point of view, which is often very limited. There's another con is that there's a lack of description that I kind of want as a reader. Sometimes Croker will just say, and the battle was fought. And that's kind of all there is to it. Or somebody will die, Croker doesn't witness it. All you get is Croker talking about, oh, that person died, that we're going to miss him, that kind of thing. So there's sort of a pro and con there as well. And con for me because I want a little bit more story. It feels like a kind of encounter to encounter style book. Like each chapter is just another kind of encounter. It doesn't feel very plot heavy at all. In fact, it's super light on plot. I could have used a lot more plot. The biggest and probably the last con that I'll bring up is their magic is kind of blah, like I didn't enjoy the magic use in this book. I'm not going to do any spoilers. I just didn't like it. I thought it was kind of lackluster. and in general, it almost felt like I was being made fun of as a reader. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think Glen Cook took his magic stuff very seriously, or I'm sure he did, but it just didn't. It did take me out of the book sometimes. I was like, what in the hell is going on, man? You know, so, and it's usually during magic moments. All right, that's the cons. The pros is that he does do a great job of creating a sense of brotherhood amongst the characters in this book. There's a couple of characters that are decently fleshed out. Croker is the most fleshed out character. And I mean, I kind of give it a pass on how two-dimensional some of the other characters are, because it's really just a historian observing. So he doesn't know their inner workings. He doesn't know what's going on in their, hearts and minds and stuff like that. He's just commenting on what he is observing, right? But Croker himself has got some complexity, and that's pretty cool. So you end up liking Croker a lot more, and then you're just getting his idea of people elsewhere. So you like some of them a little bit, and you don't, but none of them are terribly well developed. I guess I'm kind of going back into a con on this, but the pro is Croker, is what I mean. He's a cool character, and he's well developed. He's the only well developed character in the whole book. I think another pro is that this was sort of a departure, especially at the time. In '84, a lot of your books were kind of turning into formulaic fantasy for the most part, in my opinion. A lot of the stuff I was reading in the mid '80s started to kind of meld into each other, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it was the rise of TSR. There's a lot of D&D going on. There's a lot of brains in the fantasy maelstrom at the time. So there was all sorts of rules being made about how magic systems work. Like, I think around the 80s is when I started seeing more structured magic systems showing up in the novels, and also archetypes of character archetypes. You have your ranger and your thief and your wizard, and they all kind of follow the same general thing. Your rogues are lithe and spry, and your wizards are kind of physically weak but like super powerful mentally, and your ranger is wise in the woods but kind of doesn't know what the hell's going on in the city, that kind of stuff, right? The archetypes started being really, really heavily done. What I like about this is, like, his wizards are fighters. You know what I mean? He's the historian and the surgeon of the group, but he's like a really good archer, right? Croker is. So, like, it didn't follow a lot of the character archetype stuff, and it didn't follow a lot of, like, the super formula, like, we're going on a quest kind of books that I was reading at the time as well. So there was a lot of, I think, departure of convention, especially for the time that it came out. And I think that that's really, really cool. There were a lot of cons in my description here, and when I'm rating this on my 1 to 10 rating, I'm gonna give this one a 6.5. I wasn't so, like, into it that I was just like, hell yeah! It's a really easy read. It's very short. If you like military fiction, this is a great book. Especially if you like military fiction in a fantasy setting, this is a really cool book. If you like grimdark, I think you'll like this book. It's got all the boxes checked for grimdark, and there's a couple of characters that you'll fall in love with, I think, throughout it. It's definitely kind of bleak, but it sort of maintains a kind of cartooniness that a lot of fantasy authors have trouble escaping. Every time I read a other person's review or watched another person's review, they always say that this was the weakest of the original trilogy. I'm the kind of guy who will give a trilogy a chance. I'm really weird. After I've read a third book of any series, I ask myself if I'm going to stop. I have a feeling I'm going to read the first 3 of these, though. that was my review. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time with our next review. Thanks for watching, y'all.